So, hello everyone, and welcome to today's event, a debate on European environmental policy. My name is Irneia, and I'm a member of SPIS Francija, Group of Friendship and Cooperation with France, that was established under GLOBALLIS, who is organizing this event today alongside Institut Français. Let me give the word now to Directrice of Institut Français, Madame Isabelle de Vigne, to give some opening remarks, and then to Maja Milatovic, the President of SPIS Francija, to say something as well. Please, Madame de Vigne.
Thank you. Dear guests and panelists, dear partners and friends, it's a great honor for me to open this discussion today entitled Challenges for the European Environmental Policy, Priorities of the Slovenian and French Council of the EU Presidencies. There could not have been a more appropriate time to organize this debate, as both presidencies are getting closer and climate-related issues are once more at the forefront of policy discussions, be it in Ljubljana, in Paris, in Berlin, or in Brussels. Let me emphasize that this is the first event co-organized between the French Institute of Slovenia and the Group of Friendship and Cooperation with France of the Student Association GLOBALLIS SPIS Francija, which will moderate today's talks. I'm confident this is only the beginning of a fruitful and long-lasting partnership, thanks to them. 10 days after the launch of the Conference on the Future of Europe, I also would like to warmly invite people following the discussion to engage with our panelists, ask questions, broaden or narrow down the discussion. The issue being discussed today is now more than ever in the hand of citizens. So I hope there will be many interactions today. Without further ado, I'll now hand over to Irneia Staric, and I wish you a productive and inspiring evening.
Thank you very much. Now I would just like to ask Maja to give some opening remarks as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Irneia, and thank you, Madame Desvigne, for this great introduction. I would like to welcome everyone in the name of Group of Friendship and Cooperation with France. Our SPIS was established in October of 2020 with the aim of joining students of the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of Ljubljana who have interest in France, French culture, politics, literature, foreign policy, etc. We are really happy that the French Institute is so proactive and decided to work with us and be our mentors in a way. And at this point, I would really like to thank you from all of us to guide us through this event and organize such discussion. Also, big thanks to our esteemed guests, Mr. Movrin and Mr. Jiquel, for taking the time from their packed schedules to be here with us and share your thoughts with our audience. I am really looking forward for the debate, and thank you again for joining us today.
So thank you, Madame de Vigne and Maja, for opening this debate. And now I want to proceed by introducing our two speakers today, Mr. Miha Movrin and Mr. Mathieu Jiquel. So Mr. Movrin works at the Ministry for the Environment and Spatial Planning here in Slovenia in the sector of EU coordination and international affairs service. He covers EU climate and energy policies alongside the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change process. His counterpart, Mr. Jiquel, is a civil servant at the French Ministry of Ecological Transition. However, he is currently working here in Slovenia at the Ministry of the Environment and Spatial Planning, to which he was appointed by his French ministry. His main task is facilitating the exchange of information between the two countries in order to have a smooth transition of presidencies. He is also part of the Working Party on International Environmental Issues within the Council of the European Union. So thank you again to both speakers for having agreed to participate at today's debate. So now, last thing before we begin, I would like to again encourage all participants who will have any questions throughout the debate to either write them down in the chat or in the Q&A section. They will be addressed after the first part of the session, which is expected to last for about 45 minutes. So now I believe we can begin with the discussion. So building a climate neutral, green, fair and social Europe is one of the objectives of the current trio, as Europe and the rest of the world is focusing more and more on tackling the rise of temperatures, ozone depletion, ice melting, and consequently the rise of sea levels, deforestation, and the high value of CO2 emissions, which are only some of the most discussed issues regarding the climate change and environmental protection. As Frans Timmermans said a few weeks ago, it is clear from the COVID-19 pandemic that insufficient preparations can be deadly. There is no vaccine against climate change. There is only preparation. And the EU has done some preparations. So since the early 1990s, it has increasingly established itself as an international leader in global environmental governance in general, including the protection of the ozone layer, biotechnology, biodiversity, and related UN action. EU leadership has been most prominent in the area of climate change. So a question to both speakers: how would you assess the role of EU in the battle for a cleaner, safer, and healthier environment on the region and global level today? So, Mr. Mourin, would you maybe like to start?
Yes. Thank you for the question. I would say that it's safe to say that EU is indeed a world leader in the fight against climate change. Climate mitigation. EU is indeed on track to become climate neutral between 2030 and 2050. It is also important that the EU leads also in innovation, investment and growth, both in social and economic development. Maybe it was not always so in the past. We know the failure of, for instance, Copenhagen Climate Summit in 2009. Also, maybe European economic and various political crises maybe have weakened in the past EU's climate leadership, but I would say that the EU has managed to revive its leadership position. I would just mention European Green Deal, which has set up a target of no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050, it has made a wow, so to say, to decouple economic growth from the resource use. You could say that the European Green Deal is just a resolution or a communication by the Commission, but it was. I would like to point out that just recently there was a deal made between the Council and the European Parliament on the European climate law, which sets into these targets, climate targets of 55 net reduction of greenhouse gases by 2030 relative to the 1990 levels, into a legal obligation. So this is not just a resolution, but there is a legal obligation in the EU to reduce greenhouse gases by 2030 for 55%, which is quite a, I would say, quite a progress. So this is also important in the international fora. EU will lead and within EU, Slovenian presidency will lead COP26 in Glasgow in November. We hear that it will be that it will happen in person, and it's a very important thing that the European climate law was agreed upon, and that the so-called Fit for 55 package. These are measures that will practically realize this target. Will be discussed in the near future, will be presented in the near future. Of course, you could always say that the EU could do more. For instance, European Parliament opted for 60% reduction, some NGOs even 65% reduction. But these targets are always a matter of delicate compromise between various member states that have various capabilities. Maybe we will talk about that a bit later. But yes, I would say that the role of the EU in the climate mitigation is very positive in the international environment.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Žikal, would you like to add something?
Yes, first, thanks a lot for the invitation. And so if, I take the question. So the two parts, first at the regional level. So I think there is no question about the preponderant role of the EU. As a union, I have shared competence on agriculture, fisheries, and also environment, transport, and energy. Mr. Morin quotes a lot of commitment that was agreed yet. And so that means that the whole continent is for the whole continent, the EU legislators can design the laws and the regulation regarding all the areas that have direct impact on the environment. So on the global level, the EU has a huge role model to play. First, the EU member state can lead the international discussion by being this role model. And so the regulation we are taking is then really important. So you can hear a lot of ambitious statements from heads of states, but the actual implementation make really the difference. So, and moreover, the European market is the biggest consumer market in the world. So if you just improve the environment footprint on the European industry, but not on the other hand, keep the European market. If you keep the European market open to third country produce that doesn't apply the same environmental requirements, it results two bad effects, in my opinion. First, the environmental footprint, it just moved further away, but globally the Earth is damaged the same way, and hence European people see less the consequences of its own consumption, and it affects the health of living condition of other population and animals and the biodiversity in the world. And second, we impose environmental regulation to our industry, which is exposed to the world competition. So without any protection of our market, our industry becomes less competitive, and as European, we impoverish ourselves. So if we can be a role model in the environmental improvement of our economy, if we don't demonstrate that the ecological foundation doesn't make us weaker. So if we want the EU to play a role in the battle for a cleaner and safer and healthier environment at a global level, I think we must not be naive about what it has stake in the economic competition. So if we impose to China, for example, a greener way to produce, to be able to sell its product to Europe, you preserve the competitiveness of European industry, and if China implements actually this European environmental requirement, it can benefit to other markets in the world. So I think there is two issues there. So we have to improve our commitment for the environment, but keep in mind that to have an impact in the world, we have also to outreach this improvement and also protect our market in the global competition.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for this. And if we just stop maybe for a little bit more at the point that Mr. Mourin pointed out, he said that the EU could be more strict maybe in the legislation process regarding how ambitious goals we set for ourselves. And you've talked about specifically the emissions. Do you think that looking at the current agenda of priorities and goals, is it satisfactory also in the other points, not just by the emissions, but maybe biodiversity, stuff like that? Or is it suitable, or do you think we could do more also on other aspects, not just emissions, to any of the speakers?
I can start if you want. I think that the climate issue now is well understood by the citizens and also by the politics, and we have we have more complication about explaining how we must tackle the biodiversity issue. For example, so as France, we promote a mainstreaming of the expenditure on biodiversity within the multi-annual financial framework, but it was harder to implement because you know, it's easier to count the gas emission, the green gas emission, but the biodiversity loss, we lack some indicators, and so we have to build upon that. And in this regard, the CBD COP in China will be a big moment for that. And I hope that we could work on it and so go further in the regulation regarding the fight against the biodiversity loss.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mourin. Would you like to add something?
Yeah. Regarding the agenda for the next for the foreseeable future, everything is more or less determined, at least in the area of climate policy, is more or less determined by the already mentioned climate law and the new target for 2030, 55% net reduction. So-called Fit for 55 climate package will be presented in July, as the Commission has now informed us. So the agenda is such that the main target, gas reduction target, is set and agreed upon. What follows are the measures in particular sectors. For instance, ETS sector, so-called ETS sector, where there is a trading with emissions, targets in the so-called non-ETS sector, LULUCF sector, standards for the CO2 in vehicles will be heightened. etc. So this is the logic of the future development in the area of climate policy. Regarding what Mathieu just mentioned, the competitiveness, we have. This is indeed, I would agree. This is indeed an issue, so-called a danger of so-called carbon leakage. This is a danger of leaking industry or products out of EU, since in the EU carbon has a price tag, whereas in some of the third countries it doesn't. So their production comes cheaper. The so-called carbon border adjustment mechanism is supposed to address that. There is, of course, a big danger of trade war with the third countries. However, so we need to do everything that these new rules will be WTO in conformity with the WTO rules. Maybe we can talk later about biodiversity. It's also a very important issue, and Slovenia is very takes great care of biodiversity. Maybe if you have a specific question on that later, we can touch upon that.
Yeah, we'll certainly come back to that, but given the objectives that and the goals that we've discussed earlier, we're able to see that individual European countries are approaching the sustainability goals and targets very differently, right? So looking at how the EU works, environmental issues are among the more integrated policy domains, where we've seen the transfer of substantial decision-making power from domestic bodies to the regional level, so under the EU authority. Most environmental policies, as you said, are formulated within the EU bodies rather than by national and subnational governments. However, differences can be noted as some countries are, for example, shutting down all coal-fired power plants. Other countries are more focused on nuclear energy, some on hydropower. Do you believe that these individual approaches are effective enough, or should there be a stricter guideline for all the countries to transition in the same way, maybe sort of a collective action? Or what would be even possible given the differences among these countries? Maybe Mr. Žikal, if you'd like to go first.
Okay. So yeah, if I may, so your question is oriented toward the energy production and consumption, and I think we need to first make a remark that energy is a very sensible issue, because the economy is run by energy, and so energy is a physical quantity. Basically, the energy is what you need to transform a system in the opposite way of the nature balance. And for example, you need energy in order to lift a stone above your head, but you don't need energy for it going down. But you just have to let it go. But you can recover a part of this energy you spend to let it up. So the transformation in order to create things from raw material is the core of our economy. And that's mean that when you use some energy, you never leave the environment in the same state as it was before. It's really important. So you need to compare the footprints of each energy, and there is always a footprint. You also need to consider the whole process, including the storage. So because you cannot store the electricity, even the energy, you store a potential of energy, And this potential can be gravitational, like in the dam for electricity. It can be chemicals, like in the battery, but also the fossil fuels, when you burn fossil fuels to create energy, and can be nuclear. And so when you produce energy with wind turbines or solar plants, you either use the electricity immediately or you have to store it. And you need to know that an electric network needs to be balanced between the consumption and the production of electricity at each moment. So you can easily understand the nightmare to manage intermittent production of energy if you cannot store it. So to go back to the question, as the European Union, we managed to set a common goal. It was not easy for 2050, that it's the carbon neutrality. We agreed on an ambitious milestone. So Mr. Morin talked about that with the climate law in 2030, which is 55% of carbon reduction compared to 1990. So there is a common target for all the country to zero emission in 2050. However, we must take into account the starting point of each country regarding their energy mix, their industry, also their geographical situation. It's easier to have hydroelectricity if the country enjoys mountains. So, as I said earlier, we shouldn't be naive about the decarbonization of our economy. For example, some country wants to keep steel production plants, and it's indeed very important that this capacity remain within the Union. And yeah, with the lockdown, we saw that the leakage of carbon and our industry is a big issue. And the decarbonization of this industry in Europe shouldn't be detrimental for its competitiveness. That's why, so we believe that we should implement a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And France is the first country that that will shut down all its coal-fired power plant, excuse me, in 2022. But we couldn't achieve that without the nuclear energy. And if you see, if you take the data that is available, the 3 EU countries that release the less carbon per kilowatt hour of electricity are Sweden, France, and Finland, and they all can count on nuclear energy. So this energy is the most decarbonized of non-intermittent energy compared to intermittent energy like wind and solar. But still, France is committed to reduce the share of nuclear energy in the mix, but it will remain an important asset for the electricity production, because the decarbonization of our economy means also an electrification of economy. So the share of nuclear energy will, I think, reduce, but the production of the whole electricity should go a bit higher. So if you want to produce something you need, and not when there is some wind or sun, you need some reliable way to store the energy. So that's what I have to say about that.
Mr. Morin, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I would like to attach myself to what Mathieu just said about different member states, different approaches. But I would go even further to. I would like to talk about about the international, not just EU, international context. It is important to know that by their very nature, the objectives of the UNFCCC or the Paris Agreement are obligations that are binding on each state party individually. For instance, Slovenia, France are state parties to the for instance Paris Agreement, but must be coordinated collectively, because each party can only contribute to the achievement of common goal, only contribute. Slovenia cannot achieve a reduction of greenhouse gas reduction that is needed to keep the temperatures below 1.5 degrees of pre-industrial levels. So this is also emphasized. I would like to note both in the convention or in the, for instance, Rio Declaration, etc. The convention calls for the widest possible cooperation by all countries, but in accordance, cooperation, of course, in accordance with their common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities and their social and economic conditions. This is, I would say, extremely important. So it is important to know that one-size-fits-all approach would go against the principles I just mentioned. This is a legal argument, but also it is important to have a political argument in mind. So we have to be aware of the political or social, more not political, but even social unsustainability of the violation of principle of equality. Namely, if one-size-fits-all approach also violates the principle of equality, because, for instance, Luxembourg cannot be measured by the same measure as, for instance, some African country. So one-size-fits-all approach would lead to a flight from international legal commitments. For instance, of the less developed countries, they simply wouldn't want to be a part of international agreements if they had the same responsibilities as the developed countries. I think this is clear. EU law is also a mirror of that, of the picture I just tried to draw. There is a basic principle or policy which is called effort sharing. So not each member state has the same responsibilities or capabilities, but member states share their efforts, and they have different targets within the non-ETS, so-called non-ETS sector. For instance, Slovenia has a different target than, for instance, Netherlands. But there is an interplay. Of course, within the EU and in the international community of these principles I just mentioned, and of course the other principles which are more environmental principles. So the need to achieve more ambitious targets. So there is for instance, within the EU, always an interplay. Richer member states would like to achieve more, and they pressure the less developed member states to put more effort, and the less developed member states often request more resources in order to be able to reach more, etc. So it's a very complicated situation, but in general, I would agree with what Matthew said, that basic principles of solidarity, fairness, right to energy mix, national respect of different national circumstances. For instance, Slovenia has a lot of less wind than Netherlands. Therefore, we cannot have the same targets for renewables as for wind power as, for instance, Netherlands. So it's an important question, and it's a very delicate answer. Thank you.
Yeah, the differences are, as you both said, undeniable, and all the aspects that need to be taken into account. So thank you for pointing that out. And now if we move on, as we're all aware, for 6 months, starting in July, Slovenia will be presiding over the Council of the European Union for the second time. So our presidency is part of the current presidency trio, which is coming to an end after both Germany and Portugal have already finished or will be finishing their turn soon. So Mr. Mourin, could you tell us something about the priorities of our presidency in the field of environment? What are the goals? And does Slovenia plan on carrying out any special projects, any events related to the topic of environment protection and climate change?
Yeah, I will not bore you with priorities. I will be very quick. The key word for our presidency is, as it was for our trio partners before us, Germany and Portugal, is sustainable recovery, which must be based on the European Green Deal that was already mentioned. This will lead us to achieving our common goal of climate neutrality by 2050, as well as the recovery of the European economy after the pandemics. During our presidency, we will focus on 3 main priorities: climate change, biodiversity, and circular economy. Slovenian government has just recently adopted the long-term, maybe this is interesting for listeners, long-term climate strategy, which sets the national, this is important, national goal of climate neutrality by 2050. So Slovenia will be climate neutral by 2050. What is very important for us is that the COP26 will be happening during our presidency. So Slovenia will preside over the EU delegation. In the COP26, this will be very demanding task for us, since the process is already beginning for the COP26, and as we understand, it will be in-person meeting. Maybe more technically, we will within the Environment Council, we will discuss the proposals presented by the Commission in July. Mainly, these are measures to implement the new target of 55% reduction of greenhouse gases. in the area of ETS sector, non-ETS, LULUCF sector, that is CO2 standards for vehicles, etc. So this is in short, a short version. Thank you.
So yeah, the COP26 will happen in November, and then Slovenia ends the presidency in December, and after that the next trio will take over in January of 2022, and France is the first country from the trio, followed by Czech Republic and Sweden. So Mr. Žikel, you're here currently in Slovenia with the aim of ensuring continuity of policies and projects from the current trio into the next one. So could you maybe give us an insight into how the coordination works, and how does the Slovenian program and everything we will accomplish until December influence the preparation of the French program?
Yeah, thank you. So there is so the priority of the French presidency are not published yet, for several reasons, and one of them is that France will continue the work engaged by the Slovene presidency. So, and as so relating to what Mia said, that we share basically the same priorities, and so we need to know what is planned by our Slovene colleagues and at which state will be approximately the negotiation. Another reason is that the Commission will reveal, as every year, its 2022 program in September. So it's also essential to know the Commission agenda in order to build ours for the next year. So of course, the work made by the Slovene authorities during their presidency will have a tremendous impact on our presidency. And despite the fact that we don't have published our official priority, the French authorities, especially our President of the Republic, have been vocal about the environmental ambition we defend for the European Union. So as part of the Ministry of Ecological Transition, I'm really glad to see that ecology became a main item in the European agenda. So the new Green Deal was launched by the incoming Commission, and it covers all the economic aspects. So it's hard to speak about each item because now it's impossible to be expert on all the items that cover the Green Deal because it covers everything. And in the process, the Commission launched a lot of strategies. So you spoke about biodiversity, and there is, so last year, they published a strategy on biodiversity, the strategy on farm to fork that also deals with biodiversity, the new action plan for circular economy following the 2050s one. And this strategy gives us a perspective for the next decade. So it's really important. We agreed on a new multi-annual financial framework. I spoke about that for the 2021-2027 period. And this framework set an overall climate target of 30% expenditure applicable on the total amount of expenditure from the EU budget, but also the Next Generation EU, which is the financial instrument supporting the recovery plan that should be focused on climate. And what I can quote is also there is a taxonomy that has been proposed following the recommendation of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures in order to identify the assets that are in favor of fight against the climate change. On the global level, we are talking now about a task force on nature-related financial disclosure. So it's still on a very early stage, but we are in the next One Planet Summit, we talk about that. So I think it's important. And the European Investment Bank has changed its strategy to become the European Climate Bank. So the transformation was called also by our president. If you want to see what is our French priority, I can give you a tip that you know, as civil servant, you know, we have to know by heart the Starbucks statement made by our president in 2017, you know, and it's like, yeah, you can find almost all our priority regarding Europe, and so it's published, so there is no secret about that. And so if I can continue, that's the European agenda for environment policy is pretty clear. As the European Commission should reveal, so as Mia quote, the Fit for 55 package for the 14th of July. So we should keep in mind that also the sustainable transport package that will be also revealed very soon. And before that, we had so all this strategy I talk about. And so, and the improvement of European environmental regulation, you know, it's an endless work. So we will have new proposition, new package to improve. And you talk about earlier if the regulation is ambitious enough. And I think step by step we will raise our target and our ambition. And so now the Slovenian and the French presidency would have to engage in negotiation within the Council of the EU bodies, and then with the European Parliament on this package. And so I guess there is enough work for both of our presidency and even for the Czech presidency and the next, because it's, you know, the implementation of the Green Deal, it's a huge thing that will give us work till the end of the mandate of the current Commission. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the insight. Now, as we're approaching the 60 minutes mark, could you both, in order to sort of sum up and maybe take a step back, maybe do an overview of how can small countries like Slovenia and bigger or more influential ones like France best contribute to the collective fight against climate change? Now, you've said that it's the burden is shared between inside of the EU, but maybe just to sort of sum up and conclude this, Mr. Mourin, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, indeed, the burden is, the effort is shared. This is the basic principle of both international law, environmental law, and European environmental law. What I would like to stress here in the context of your question, what can a member state like Slovenia or a country like Slovenia do in order to fight climate change? I would like to stress, maybe this will sound surprising to you, but I would like to stress indeed an importance of biodiversity in both national and global context. Namely, we tend to forget the biological diversity contributes significantly to climate change mitigation and adaptation. This is also an important position to take. So this contribution of biodiversity should be taken into account when evaluating the contribution of member states to achieving European, for instance, 2030, but later it will come to 2040 targets, greenhouse gas reduction targets, as well as renewables targets. And finally, climate neutrality by 2050. Slovenia is a bit particular since it has a highest share of Natura 2000 areas, and as such, it contributes considerably to EU biodiversity goals. Almost 60% of our surface is covered with woods. That makes Slovenia, for instance, the third, maybe fourth, but I think the third most forested member state in EU after Sweden and Finland. This is on one side, but on the other side, as I mentioned earlier, these measures are measures that were taken for conservation of biodiversity, including Natura 2000, are prohibiting us from any significant deployment of renewable energy sources, especially, for instance, wind and hydro. So it's important to have in mind that with biodiversity, we are contributing also to the climate change mitigation, and this must not be forgotten. Of course, on the other side, we will need to, for sure, strengthen our efforts in greenhouse gas reduction in the context of more ambitious 2030 target, maybe as much as 10% or less. We don't know yet. This is a matter of future negotiations. But it's important to balance this sometimes incommensurable values of climate on one hand and biodiversity on the other hand. But I think that the member state, like our country, like Slovenia, can strive for both. We don't need to strengthen only one aspect on the expense of the other, but we need to have both sides of the coin. This can be our very important addition to the global efforts to climate change mitigation.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned biodiversity, because especially as you said, here in Slovenia, we could have a discussion like this just on biodiversity, and I think that that's basically our strength when we're looking at how much of basically Natura 2000 we have. So, but what about France? Maybe Mr. Žikal, you could continue, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to stress that regarding the chairing of the Council of EU, there is no small or big countries. You know, the presidency lasts 6 months for everyone. And yeah, I want to jump in the biodiversity item and what Mia said. Slovenia has a very well-preserved nature and biodiversity. And yeah, it's really an asset and a model for a lot of countries in Europe and also beyond. And I'd like to say that if it hadn't been for Slovenian bears, there would be no more bear in Pyrenean mountains. So you're the official providers of bear for France. So yeah, you help us a lot. And also, you know, despite the the smaller areas of your country compared to France, you have a very diverse country. You have a seaside, mountains, rivers, and also, yeah, you have a big port in Koper that is the biggest regarding containers on the Adriatic. So, and you have every means of electricity production. So you have knowledge of all the issues. And so maybe France, we have the biggest country and maybe better means to influence the Commission at an early stage, but it's outside the presidency. But I think, yeah, Slovenia, you have an understanding of all the issues regarding environment and energy. And in this regard, so there is no quite a big difference.
Yeah, great. I completely agree. And so thank you for your answers for now. I think I'm concluding this part of today's event as we're now moving to the Q&A part. I'd like to encourage all participants to either pose their questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. Madame Morel from Institut Français will then read them, and one of the speakers will address it. So I think, Madame Morel, we're ready for the first questions.
Thank you very much, Yerneia, Miha, and Mathieu for this very interesting debate. So yes, indeed, we have already 6 questions. I will go with the first one. So this is a question about clean energy and biodiversity, and especially hydropower that can harm biodiversity. So I'm gonna read it. It's a bit long, but so if we go back to renewable source of energy, according to the Green Deal, Europe wants to become climate neutral by 2050, and renewable energy sources are a crucial part of this project. However, certain questions arise. Let's take hydropower as an example. The hydro dams provide more than a third of the clean energy, but harm the environment, especially biodiversity. The WWF reports that since 1970, migratory freshwater fish species have declined by 93%. This seems to create friction between the climate goals and effort to preserve nature, as it is clear that we absolutely need low carbon green energy, but decarbonization can't come at the expense of biodiversity. How is this issue addressed, and do you see a strategy with which we could tackle it in the years to come? Thank you.
So I believe we've talked about that before, but maybe one of you wants to address it a little bit further. So which one?
Yes, I think it's a perfectly topical question. The listener asks that says that the decarbonization cannot come at the expense of biodiversity. I agree with that, but this is not a very peculiar thing, I would say. There are incommensurable values everywhere. For instance, there is a certain tension between in philosophy, if you like, or in law, between equality and liberty, for instance. So, but it's not so. There needs to be some middle ground between these two values. How is this issue addressed in the years to come? Says the question. I would say that there is a quite refined, sophisticated process in the within the EU institutions. So when the Commission proposes a new climate policy instrument, member states negotiate for both, for the greenhouse gas reduction targets and the renewables targets. And for instance, we talked about biodiversity. All these facts must come into account. So each member states will negotiate and will try to present its case as good as it can. And for instance, the high share of Natura 2000, the particularities of the Slovenian forestry will all count when we will try to when the Commission will or when the member states will finally agree on the particular targets for Slovenia. So I think there is quite a sophisticated procedure in order to tackle this issue of incommensurability between biodiversity and climate targets.
Thank you. Mr. Žikal, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Mia said, that we should take into account all the aspects. It's underlying my previous statement that there is no perfect production of energy and there is always a footprint. So if you focus on hydropower has a lot of assets. It's reliable, carbon-free, and moreover, you can store the energy produced by other means of production, especially wind and solar production, by reversing the turbine. So it's something that can be great, and hydropower dam is one of the most manageable way of electricity production, and you can provide a huge power in a short delay if needed. So there is a bright side, but the dark side is that, yeah, you have to flood an entire valley and change drastically the ecosystem. You create a barrier for the migration of fish species, like it was mentioned. And even for human population, you need to move a lot of people, enterprises, farms. And there is also a security issue, even higher than for nuclear power plants. The biggest catastrophe was done by the breakdown of hydropower plant dam. So regarding only the issue, if you focus only on the issue of migration of fish species, it happens that in my previous position, I work for the Inland Waterways Agency in France, and there was, and I think there still is, a large program of construction of fishways in order to bypass the dam for fishes. And in that case, it's navigation dams, so they are not as high as hydropower dam. However, it's still feasible, but more expensive. But there is a way. But anyway, there's still the discussion of habitat for a lot of species. But I want to say that you always need to take a step back. And if you can find a report underlying the dark side of each mean of production, and the trap is being cynical and considering that at the end, every mean of production, of electricity production, have dark side. So why struggle for the transition? Let's continue with fossil fuels. And I strongly believe that all the problems are not equals. So you have to see the asset and the dark side of each of the production, but keep in mind that if you take a look at the number, for example, of deaths of humans due to the pollution caused by fossil fuels and even the damage on the biodiversity, there is no competition with renewable energy and even nuclear energy. So if you have to keep that in mind, I think.
Okay, thank you for the extensive answers. Now I think we can get another question.
Yes. So on another level, so it's a question about the COVID-19 situation and okay, I'm gonna say the question. So the Slovenian and French societies are quite different. How do the countries plan to approach the challenges the COVID-19 situation imposed on the environment regarding the exponential use of plastic? So for example, gloves, masks, singular packaging.
I give the word to any of you.
Yeah, so I can start. It's not an issue I know very well, but yeah, it's a question of circular economy and the waste management. So it's been, you know, we didn't expect this pandemic to rise, and so in fact there is a lot of product that is not renewable that was used and sometimes released everywhere. So it's really an issue. We should work on that. And so if once more, if you see the great picture, there is an ambition to stop the single use of plastic. And there is also an ambition for a more circular economy and to for the responsibility of the producer and so on. But yeah, it's a really tricky question, and it's linked also to the competition because, you know, most of the products are done. Is made abroad in China. So also once again we put barriers or not, and it has to be compatible with the World Trade Organization. So it's a tricky question, but yeah, we have to address that.
Maybe just to add, yeah, this is indeed the issue of waste management, which I don't know very well. So I couldn't say that if this was really a huge issue or what kind of magnitude of an issue this is. I would just add that on the other side, what Matthew was talking very interestingly about, that there are always two aspects to each means of production. Probably you are aware of the maybe the only positive outcome of the pandemics is that the transport emissions have gone down significantly due to less mobility, to work from home, etc. And what's interesting that also in Slovenia we have noticed when doing our studies on achieving greenhouse gas reductions targets that also due to the possibly, this is not yet official, but possibly also due to the COVID pandemics, we will reach our targets for 2020.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, another question about carbon markets. So the carbon market didn't work because of political weak ambitions. How can we trust in the power of the EU today? Did something change?
I wouldn't say that the carbon markets don't work. I would say that carbon markets are extremely important measure of achieving greenhouse gas reductions. ETS, European carbon market, is I think the first major carbon market, and it still is the biggest. It's not the only one anymore, but it's the biggest for sure one in the world. It accounts for more than 40% of European emissions, and I would say that it works. The prices of carbon are going up, which is a good sign, which means that the market is working. The market is anticipating the changes in the policy. The market is anticipating or already reacting to the more ambitious overall target for 2030. So I would say that, and it's cost efficient, of course. It forces the operators. They're called operators. So the holders of the facilities that emit carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, to invest in cleaner energy.
Yeah, I totally agree with Mia. We cannot say that the carbon market is not working. Yeah, we can talk about the ambition, but yeah, it's an achievement of the European Union, and you know, it's something that prevents also the carbon leakage with the free allocation. And so it was something really hard to implement. And so as Mia said, the carbon price is rising. And so we believe that to go a step further, we have to strengthen the framework. And so we believe that a carbon adjustment mechanism, yeah, for the further steps should be implemented. But currently I think it's an amazing tool that we managed to put in place. And so, yeah, we can always improve things and have higher ambition, but currently it's something that EU achieved. And so it's a good ground to build upon for the further step.
And again, free allowances in this system is again a tool in order to differentiate between different member states. Between member states that are very highly dependent on coal, for instance, and the member states that aren't. So the member states that are in the moment dependent on coal need free allowances, and they can invest in future into the cleaner technology. And we expect that there will be less and less free allowances, and there will be more and more convergence between member states, and the technology will undoubtedly converge into a greener technology.
Thank you. So now a question about fiscality. which control does have EU on fiscality in national states? Is it possible to ask for, it's possible to ask for taxes, but if you don't have any authority to control it, nobody will have to pay it. And that's the case today. So the question is about, so what take the EU has on fiscality in national states. Who wants to go for it?
Yeah, maybe I can start. Fiscality is not a shared competence of the union, so it's really hard to have a regulation or on this topic, because you need unanimity. So yeah, it's a really tricky question. We were talking, yeah, there is negotiation on the tax on the financial trade and so on, and it's really hard to go further. And even, you know, for the VTA tax, the negotiation goes very slowly, and because you need unanimity. So it's yeah, it's hard to to have a lot of progress on this topic.
Mihal, your mic is...
Yeah, I'm not an expert, but taxes are in general in member state competence. In the ECOFIN Council, there is, as Mathieu said, has to be. There is no. Sorry, I don't have the word. There is suglasje. How do you say?
Consensus.
Yeah, consensus. Yeah, pardon. In ECOFIN, there is consensus, as I know, but in the field of environment, there is, for instance, CO2. There are, for instance, CO2 standards which are harmonized, and this will be CO2 standards for vehicles, and this will be made stricter in the near future. So there is some competence of the EU in this area, in the environment, in the field of environment, and these CO2 standards. I would say that they work. The quality of the vehicles have improved over the years.
Thank you. Now a question about so the plan de relance in France following the COVID situation. So the plan de relance supports both green and brown economy, such as Air Force. One of the recommendations of Jean Covici, who is a French thinker on energy transition, was to support the transition of the brown economy during the COVID relance. Why did the national states act on that way? Maybe Mathieu, you want to go first?
Yeah, so the recovery plan, you know, it was agreed at the unanimity with the multi-annual financial framework. So we have to make negotiation, and it was, you know, we managed to have to impose 37% of expenditure in the green for environment project. And also what we manage also is that on the other component of the the recovery plan is that you have to commit in some regulation regarding also the environmental aspect, and within the European semester, this commitment will be assessed, and like every year, it's the greening of the European semester, and it's also an achievement. So it was, it's always a compromise with also Eastern countries that have other maybe other issue to deal with, and we have to take into account some steps that have been done forward. For example, the Polish government recently committed to close the coal mining. So it's, it was unbelievable a few years ago. So yeah, there is, in some member states, there is still some expenditure that is planned in the brown economy, but not so much. We have to be honest on that. And yeah, I think I hope that there will be some improvement. Another thing that will change is that there will be a renewal of the stated regulation framework. It's what the state are allowed, all the states are allowed to help the competitive economy, and so we can always reduce the window for brown economy. But yeah, I think there is still some, but it's shrinking little by little. Maybe not as fast as we want, but it's always a compromise we have to do with other countries.
I cannot comment about the brown economy, but I can say that the multi-annual financial framework and also the instrument for recovery, Next Generation EU, will deploy at least 30% of, which is extremely big number. 30% of investment will be so-called green investments. Also, the Commission said that in the next term, 21-30. There will be 350 billion of euros invested in will be budget for the next term, and 30% of this budget will be so-called green investment. So I think this is at least as a plan, a significant plan.
Thank you very much. So last question, it's about sustainable tourism. So how much attention do Slovenia and France plan to pay to the so-called green tourism or sustainable tourism, its development and promotion in their presidencies? What are the main goals and challenges with it? Maybe Michał, you want to start?
No, I must say I'm not an expert on green tourism. But I would just repeat, as long as tourism is connected with transport, that during the epidemics, the emissions coming from transport have indeed came down, and this is very important because the transport is a sector in Slovenia that is that has a steady rise. So and it has a disproportionately large share in the energy, in the so-called in the energy output in Slovenia. So it's important to know that I would say that there is a possibility that the transport can go down if green tourism is domestic tourism. This is a promising way forward, I would say.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on tourism either. Yeah, I agree with Mia about the transportation, which is, I think, a big issue when you're thinking about tourism. For example, so especially the I don't know to say that you know the cruise, yeah, the cruise boats, that I think it's it's a nightmare, and the engine is still running, you know, on the port to produce electricity instead of just plugging it on in the port. So I think there is some improvement in this regard, and also I know that in the northern country there is a shaming about using planes to go abroad at the other side of the earth to have some vacation. But yeah, this apart, yeah, you can improve also the waste management in the tourism. I think it's also a big issue. But yeah, I don't know the total subject, so I will end on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
So I believe that there are no further questions, and also the time is right. So thank you again for all the questions. I believe we can end this discussion here. So allow me to thank again to both speakers for participating in this debate on behalf of SPIS Francija and Institut Français. I believe this was a great discussion. It was recorded, so the recording will stay at the Facebook page of Institut Français and on the YouTube channel of GLOBALLIS if anyone would be interested in reviewing it. It was great to talk to you, and many thanks to all of those who attended the event, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yaneya. Thank you, Miha. Thank you, Mathieu. And thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.